Nasdara isn't just a map, it brings a whole load of lore into the DayZ universe, and knowing it will change everything you thought you knew about the map. And here I'm going to tell you everything. If you like the video, please leave a like or a subscribe, it really helps me out. But without further ado, let's get into the video.
It's high. Wonder if you can see the coast from there. Well, you can now.
So first we'll talk about some important things, and then we'll go on to the actual lore and the story behind Nasdara. So let's begin. Long before the infected ever wandered its streets, before abandoned military checkpoints baked beneath the desert sun, and before survivors fought over the last drops of water, Nasdara was a province with thousands of years of history. Every ruined building, every crumbling fortress, every dried up river tells part of the story. Most players will probably look at Nasdara and simply see another desert. This region has one of the richest backstories ever created for an official DayZ map. Firstly, Nasdara province sits within the country of Takistan, but this isn't exactly the Takistan that long-time Arma players remember. Instead, it's a completely reimagined version. It borders neighbouring Chinaris to the northeast and Ardistan to the west, placing it in one of the most contested regions in the DayZ universe. But its story begins long before modern warfare. This is a province filled with ancient ruins, forgotten monuments, and the remains of old monarchies. Throughout Nasdara, you'll discover relics from civilizations that disappeared centuries ago. Historical blades like the Akinaka, whose design dates back more than 2,500 years, still survive here as a priceless artifact, hinting at just how old the region truly is. The famous Jambia dagger, another weapon inspired by centuries of craftsmanship, reflects traditions passed down throughout generations long before the modern world arrived. These aren't simply weapons added for gameplay. They're physical reminders that people have lived, traded, and fought across this land for millennia. As kingdoms rose and fell, Nasdara became an important crossroads between the east and the west. The architecture, clothing, and language all reflect this. Persian, or Farsi, became the dominant language of the province, while influences from across Central Asia and the Middle East shaped its culture. Even after society has collapsed, players will still find bilingual road signs written in both English and Farsi, evidence that outside powers once played an important role in the region's development. But geography would become both Nasdara's greatest strength and its greatest curse. Situated between powerful empires, the province spent centuries caught in the middle of conflicts that were often much larger than itself. Nasdara quickly found itself trapped between the British Empire and Imperial Russia, with each side competing for influence over the region. Eventually, that struggle ended with annexation into the Soviet Union, bringing an entirely new era of political control. The Soviet period permanently reshaped the landscape. Military installations spread across the province, concrete infrastructure replaced old settlements, strategic facilities were constructed to secure the region, while the government ruled through dictatorship. Even centuries of history couldn't stop another empire from leaving its own mark across the desert. And yet, like so many occupations throughout history, Soviet control wouldn't last forever. The dictatorship was eventually overthrown by Western coalition forces, introducing another dramatic shift in Nasdara's identity, and as a result, massive investment projects followed. Modern highways stretched across the southern part of the province, border crossings linked Takistan with neighbouring Ardistan. New infrastructure promised a different future, one driven by international investment rather than Soviet rule. For a brief period, it may have looked as though peace had finally arrived, but it didn't last. Instead of stability, the collapse of the dictatorship created a dangerous power vacuum. Various militant groups fought private military companies, government forces, and each other for control of the province. Conflict spread throughout the countryside. Military positions multiplied. Entire communities became battlefield. Every new faction left another scar across the landscape. and you can still see those scars today. Destroyed checkpoints, abandoned military compounds, derelict Soviet facilities, half-finished Western projects, roads leading nowhere. Everywhere you travel across Nasdara, the environment quietly tells the story of a nation that never truly recovered from decades of conflict. And then nature itself began turning against the people who remained, because the wars may have shaped Nasdara, but they weren't what finally destroyed it. For decades, the province had survived occupation, dictatorship, foreign intervention, and civil conflict. Entire generations had lived through violence that would have broken most nations. But somehow, life continued. Then, without warning, something far more terrifying than war arrived. Not an invading army, not another revolution, an infection. To this day, nobody knows where it came from. Some believe it was spread beyond Takistan's borders. Others think it had always been there, waiting for the right moment. Whatever the truth, it moved faster than anyone could understand. By the time rumors became warnings, the outbreak had already begun. At first, people refused to believe it. Reports of sudden violence, entire families disappearing overnight, soldiers opening fire on people who had only hours earlier been their neighbors. Police stations were overwhelmed, hospitals filled beyond capacity, roads choked with desperate civilians trying to outrun something they couldn't even explain. The government tried to contain it, but even they realized soon that this was completely out of their control. Roadblocks appeared across the province. Military checkpoints that once searched for weapons now searched for the infected. Villages became sealed off. Cities quarantined. Convoys sent to evacuate civilians before the roads became impossible to travel. But none of it was enough. Every attempt to slow the outbreak only bought time. Soon the roads leading out of Nasdara became the very places people feared most. Thousands trying to flee, vehicles abandoned after running out of fuel, families separated in the chaos, some choosing to hide in their homes instead, hoping the nightmare would pass, with a few heading to the mountains or the open desert, believing isolation offered safety. But for many it didn't. The infection didn't care whether you were a soldier, a police officer, a shopkeeper, or a farmer. Uniforms no longer mattered. The wars that had consumed Nasdara for generations suddenly became meaningless. Humanity had found a new enemy, and this time, there was no front line to defend. Within weeks, organized resistance collapsed. The checkpoints fell silent. The markets emptied. The reservoirs were left unattended. And the highways carried no traffic. But worst of all, for those unlucky enough to survive, power stations were shut down. The pumps stopped working and water became scarce. Dust slowly reclaimed roads that had once connected towns, while buildings that had survived decades of war were left standing empty beneath the desert sun. And those who couldn't escape never truly left. They still wander the streets today, not as monsters, but as the final echoes of the lives they once lived. With soldiers still dressed in uniforms, ready to report to duty, police officers who never finished their final shift, market traders who never closed their stalls, and the farmers who never returned home. Their clothes, their wounds, and the desert itself all tell the same story. Nasdara wasn't destroyed in a single day. It simply stopped being a nation, one survivor at a time.